Michael's wife, Maggie, was living with dementia and she moved into a care home, and Michael moved in with her. And I think the insights that he's got have been absolutely amazing and unique. And of course, Michael produced a fantastic book which he wrote called What Would Maggie Do? And in that book, Michael goes through all the issues related to supporting somebody who's living with dementia, ensuring that all the work is done in ways that would support them with the things they like. And he was also a powerful advocate for her in a system that tended to be very risk averse. So, Michael, I think that your insights are unique. I'm really pleased that you wrote this book because it's going to be available to every care provider, and it gives some really very fascinating insights. And it's really great to be talking to you on the eve of Care Home Open Week, because this is an opportunity for care homes to showcase what they do. And I really hope that care home staff and also people who've got relatives and families in care homes will get your book and will be able to see your perspective. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, if
Thank
I
you,
may,
Martin.
which is, first of all, to say, what do you think was the most irritating thing that you found when you were living in a care home, and how did you navigate your way through that irritation?
What a good question and an unexpected one. I suppose it was all the rules and regulations surrounding mobility and walking. And although that sounds a trivial issue, from my perspective, as my wife lost her mental faculties, keeping physically going and physically well-being was absolutely crucial. I was determined to keep her walking. But as she began to lose stability, the ways in which she had to be held or got up from a chair and all that kind of thing was surrounded by so many regulations, many of which clearly didn't work in her case, clearly didn't apply, and yet people felt obliged to enforce them to the letter. Of course, I had to combat them, but my goodness, it was a battle again and again and again. And I had to be extremely tenacious to overcome the resistance.
Yeah, and I think that also came through because one of the things that comes through your book is the importance of physical exercise and how you engage in ways that enable people to stay mobile and also have access to outside space, etc. And I know that you sometimes faced a lot of resistance from the system around, particularly around risk. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that you had when you were trying to give Maggie the best and most normal life possible, and yet you were in a system that was very risk averse?
Well, yes, certainly. I mean, obviously, the one that I've just mentioned, which was the issue of mobility, but it actually similar attitudes pervaded a tremendous amount of the decision making, and so even, for example, such issues as medication, on feeding, on whether to send somebody to hospital, even on surgery. On the, I had to battle to make them do quite simple surgery against the wishes of the consultant, which for what I found completely spurious ideas about risk. And the problem I found is that I think that, a lot of people talk about positive risk taking, but there's much more to it than that. I think there's, in many cases, a deep confusion and misunderstanding surrounding risk, confusing the risk to the individual with the risk to the institution, which are quite different things, between long-term and short-term risk, between measurable and unmeasurable risk, process versus judgment, and actually the extent to which the individuals and their legal representatives should be involved in all decisions about risk, because in a sense that's a personal decision. And all of those things I found really need to be looked at with a deep review of the whole attitude to risk assessment and risk management.
Yeah, and Michael, one of the things that really came through for me from your book was the fact that we need to shift the system from being risk averse to being risk aware, and also it really showed as well the fact that you knew Maggie so well really came through, that you understood what her risk appetite was, and you were enabling her to live the life she would want to live, knowing how she lived her life previously. So I think there's some really interesting takeaways around risk within your book. What do you think are the other big takeaways that you would like to just sort of point people in the direction of before they read the book, so that they can see from your perspective what you think are the big takeaways from your experience?
Well, I suppose the two other big things, apart from risk itself, but are really quite strongly related, are judgment against process. And I think this is something that's infecting the whole of our society. We've become so process driven, it's even coming up in this business with the police recently. We're so process driven that people find it difficult to exercise judgment or even common sense, and are more inclined to tick the box. And one of the things I'm proposing is that authorized people should be encouraged to adapt and interpret regulation to the needs of the individual rather than slavishly follow it to the letter. So that would be one major issue. But a second issue is the involvement of family, particularly those with power of attorney, relevant family, and of course with the permission of the individual, because I think there is a widespread and lack of understanding of power of attorney. People don't seem to understand fully that the person with power of attorney has exactly the same power to be heard, right to be heard, both in input to the decision and in making the decision, as would the person themselves if they were able to speak for themselves. And I think that is a huge issue. And the involvement of families with the permission of the individual is crucial. And of course, what care homes are doing by not involving people, sometimes treating them as visitors rather than decision makers, is actually exposing them to risk. Because if they involve people in the decisions, they're not going to get sued for it. But if they don't involve them and they make decisions that really they should have actually got permission to make, then they are exposing themselves. So funnily enough, by trying to avoid risk, they're sometimes taking more risk than they needed to take.
Yeah, indeed. I really felt that that came across very strongly in the book. Also, what came across as well, how difficult it was to navigate a system where every bit of it was processed, and sometimes different processes for different bits of it. So, for example, the engagement with the care home, which what's really comes out of this book is the way in which you establish good relationships with a care home. And then, of course, you also had to go into battle with the NHS, who had a different set of processes and a different risk appetite. And so I think, there are so many really excellent takeaways that come from your book. And certainly within the Care Home Open Week, I would certainly urge anybody who's working in care, who's got some loved one in care, or indeed who's going into care themselves, to get this book and read it, because I think it gives you a really interesting perspective, but it also gives you a route map on how to navigate some of the challenges that people are going to face when they go into care. So, Michael, I really thank you for writing this book. I really hope that care workers, care professionals, care givers will all start to look at this book and use it a bit, not only as a really compelling and great read, but also as a way in which they can help to navigate their way through a system that sometimes is about the system, not about the person. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. And if I can thank you very much for all the support that you've given me, and also just stress at the end that my overall experience of the care home and the basic care received was very good, and I'm very happy and continue to recommend people to the home. But it is to do with the processes, regulations, and all that kind of thing, that there needs to be a significant change in the culture. And that's what I'm proposing and putting out some quite detailed steps towards. So thank you very much indeed for your support.